This is the Nebraska Broadcasters Association History Project, a series of video interviews with the people who have impacted Nebraska broadcasting for decades. Today we are back at the studios of UNO Television in Omaha. I'm Neil Nelkin for the NBA. An important component of broadcasting has always been agriculture and weather coverage. It represents an important information source and a part of the public safety aspects of radio stations serving their communities. While a number of radio stations have excelled in these areas over the years, none has done it better or more completely than 50,000 watt KRVN in Lexington, Nebraska. There are so many unique and historic aspects to KRVN. Today we're going right to the source and find out exactly how it got to be where it is today. We welcome legendary Nebraska broadcaster Eric Brown of KRVN. Eric, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Neil. Happy to be here.
KRVN is legendary in so many ways, but historically it was built to serve a particular constituency. Can you take us back to the very beginnings of why KRVN came to be?
Certainly. There was a really bad blizzard in 48-49 across Nebraska. There's no statewide weather forecast, so there's no warning. Like 79 people died, 65,000 cattle, 45,000 sheep, what have you, all the way down. The blizzard raged, closed roads, the railroad couldn't get through. Omaha Lincoln Station was still saying there was a mild storm in the middle of western Nebraska.
They had no way of knowing any different.
They didn't know because they did their best. There wasn't a statewide forecast. So that was the opportunity to get the four farm groups together: Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, Co-op Council, and the Grange. My father was executive director of Nebraska Co-op Council, which he founded in 1946. They saw this as a way to work together to really benefit rural people, not only have weather information, but market information, as well as news and ag news. Also, we've always had a strong education component all the way through. So those four farm groups worked together, incorporated in 1948.
As Nebraska Rural Radio Association?
Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Board of directors, 9 people, 7 men and 2 women.
Now that was unusual back then.
Yes.
To have women on the board of a...
They chose 9 smart people. That's the way they phrased it. They had a model though, Neil. The Farm Bureau representative said, we know a guy in Ohio, Fred Palmer, was a consultant for a Farm Bureau-owned radio station, WRFD, in Worthington, Ohio. And my father said, well, we don't have much money to bring a consultant out or hire him. They said, we'll bring him out. Fred Palmer could sell ice cubes to Eskimos, as the old cliche is. She helped get the group organized. You know, they made an application for 25,000 watts, 1010 for KRVN.
Where'd they come up with 1010? How'd they find that frequency?
That was just a Canadian frequency. Somehow they did the research and found it.
1010, 25,000 watts, Lexington, Nebraska, daytime only.
Daytime only, but a hellacious signal. About 2/3 of the state, basically.
There were people who were sitting by their radios on that day when KRVN went on the air. They were tuned to 1010, couldn't hear anything, and then you went on the air.
Went on the air.
The Nebraska Rural Radio Association, Incorporated, operating with a power of 25,000 watts by authority of the Federal Communications Commission on the assigned frequency of 1010 kilocycles. KRVN, Lexington, Nebraska.
But just about didn't happen at 7:30. The critics said it'd be a cold day in hell when 4 farm groups actually worked together to build a radio station. Working together, building a station, two components. They were half right. It was a cold day in Lexington, 20 below. The engineer's car wouldn't start. He couldn't drive to the transmitter, which was 6 miles east of town. But the owner of the hotel had a car that was in a garage and warmed up, so Emil Benthak, the owner of the hotel, took the engineer to the transmitter site in the nick of time.
KRVN was born.
Yes.
And your dad was general manager, the first general manager.
Correct.
Max Brown. He had no broadcast experience, had never set foot in a radio station.
Correct. He was an ag economist by his background with a bachelor's and master's in ag econ and started a PhD. He knew agriculture, he knew economics, he likes Nebraska. So I said, let's give this a try. So at age 40, he started a new career as the general manager, and they used consultants to find a program director, a chief engineer, and a sales manager, and all the rest of the staff.
You were pretty flush with money on that first operating day. You were able to afford a full staff and facilities. That's really not the case, right?
That's not even close to being flush with money. Department heads couldn't cash their paychecks on the same day because there wasn't any money. They couldn't pay the power bill at the transmitter for several months. So my father went to the board of directors of Dawson Public Power and asked for a little extra time. In 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and he asked to come back again. And the manager kind of groaned and said, "Really, Brown?" I said, "Yeah, just let me come back and talk to your board." We came back and said, "Thank you, gentlemen. Here's the check for the light bill. We can pay in the future. And here's a box of cigars. Enjoy."
Appreciation.
Yes.
So originally you had farmers and ranchers, and you were going door to door, not you per se, but your dad and the people who put the station together, going door to door selling shares.
Basically, it's a share that's a non-interest bearing kind of situation. They had 320 meetings across Nebraska to explain this concept. The $10 for a membership. There's no cash value on the open market. If you want to invest more, you could do a $1,000 debenture, they called it back then. And some people did. One lady named Virginia Smith became a congresswoman.
We all know Virginia Smith. You have a pretty cute story regarding her.
She and Haven had a big roll-top desk. You can picture all the cubby holes. One was investments, this one was donations. She debated which way, when donations. Figures you'd never see her money again. Eventually, everybody got paid.
Everybody got paid, and KRVN went on as 10:10 a.m. daytime only. What was the programming like in those early years? What did you actually have on the air?
News, ag news, markets, and more markets, weather, and sports. We worked with the Omaha Grain Exchange and finally got permission to broadcast live from the floor at the Omaha Grain Exchange. Open mid-morning closing markets. Same thing with the Omaha Livestock Market. So there was a reporter base there, and that gave level playing field for everybody. Then you know what the markets were in Omaha that really controlled the tone for the whole state.
And this was the first time that agricultural people out in western Nebraska actually had access to live market reports out of Omaha.
Exactly. So it was very, very important to level the playing field. We did locate in Lexington because of a very aggressive Lexington Chamber of Commerce who raised money, donated the land for the transmitter, had a sort of $15,000 grant, which was paid back eventually, that they were aggressive. So since then, the word Lexington's been on the air 10,421 times or something like that, but incredible success story for the chamber.
Well, when people think of KRVN, Lexington is obviously tied right to it because you've been there for so long. What about other programming? Did you play a lot of music? Was there children's programming? What about religion?
There was some music, some children's program. The religious story is fascinating because Reverend Theodore Epp was building an organization called Back to the Bible, which came to a worldwide broadcast, big organization.
Still based in Lincoln.
Still based in Lincoln. He did a wonderful job, and they were willing to pay for a half-hour program, Monday through Friday, 9 o'clock, pay a year in advance. If it hadn't been for that, who knows what might have happened.
It might not have happened.
It could be quiet out there.
Daytime coverage, but you were still able to do sports broadcasts, even though much of the sports really happened after your sign-off?
Well, that's true, but Husker sports usually are about 1 o'clock games then. Mm-hmm. And some Lincoln and Omaha stations objected to us carrying Husker sports. So my father said, okay, I'm just going to take a microphone and we'll sit in my seats in the stands. We went in 1950 to buy a pair of football tickets. They said, where do you want to sit? He said, the 50. He said, okay. So we had 50-yard tickets on the west side. Of course, running a wire that far, it wouldn't have worked, but some of the PR people didn't quite know that. But anyway, they finally relented, and that fall of '51, we started carrying Husker football. We carried it ever since.
Now, which network were you affiliated with, or have you been affiliated with all of them over the years? There used to be 4.
Basically, all of them at different times, but it's consistent since '51. I think the only station in Nebraska that can say that.
It came to be that you were after a nighttime authorization. You had the daytime signal at 10:10, but you couldn't go nighttime at 10:10.
Right.
And you determined that you needed nighttime coverage. So a long, expensive legal battle ensued?
That was a 10-year project. The basis for that was the FCC broke up clear channel stations in the country.
Now, back then, Clear Channel did not mean what it means today as a corporate name.
No, Clear Channel meant nobody else was on that frequency in the whole U.S. WCBS in New York was on 880. And the FCC opened up applications for North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska for that 880. 4 stations applied, 2 in South Dakota dropped out immediately. KMJ and KRVN battled and battled and battled and battled.
Now, KRVN based in Lexington,
And
KMJ in
yeah, thank you.
in Grand Island.
Right.
And you guys were going head to head for that 880 frequency.
So it was expensive legal engineering battle because the basis was who had the most unduplicated nighttime coverage. And that was what they're looking for.
Unduplicated nighttime coverage.
So this would
Those
be-
are phrases they don't hear anymore.
No, they called it the white area, which you don't hear anymore.
Right.
But it was trying to get service to more people at night.
So then, with the applications both filed at the FCC for 880, directional at night,
Yes.
because you had to protect WCBS in New York.
This picture of balloon, okay? If you drew a line from Lexington to Lincoln in New York, it's almost a straight line. You have that balloon, you put your finger in the balloon, there's a big knoll right there. That's the knoll pointed to New York City. And then the other side of the balloon goes out, so the signal goes way west to the west coast at night. It was the severest suppression of any nighttime signal in the country. And it took forever to get that right.
How many towers?
That was a 4-tower array.
4 towers at 50 kilowatts.
And the consulting engineer, George Lonis, was a bulldog who worked and worked and worked, and they did measurements thousands of times to try and get that right. He stayed with us at our house for 4 months because we couldn't afford a hotel, and we had an extra room, quote, family room, the rec room. So
You became family.
we became close family.
So now you've got 880 full time, and the story is you couldn't hear the station at night to the east of Lexington at all, but you could hear it 300 miles off the west coast at night.
We'd get calls from the West Coast. The time change. Somebody even partying all night would just call up and tell us that, hey, we're listening to the radio. Mm-hmm. When Elliott, CBS Sports, called south of LA once, just to say, hey, I got the signal.
Is it true that you were able to sell brokered religion programming at night for the West Coast audience?
We had some of that, yes, because that's a large territory. Mm-hmm. Geographically, and no one else covered it that way. So it worked. But it was a long, expensive fight with KMJ, an interesting sidebar. Finally, KMJ owner and management decided they would give up the Ghost and use their assets in other places. So the KRVN, their attorneys and engineers, and KMJ, their attorneys and engineers, met in person with the FCC commissioners in Washington.
That's very rare.
I've never heard of it ever being done, but that happened.
So you were successful. You got 880 the way you had hoped you would, and this was a pretty big accomplishment. Now, what was the initial reaction from the audience, from the stockholders, the shareholders, who felt that this was a long, expensive battle, and now you're there?
They were overjoyed. Now we had to get it on the air. So we had a long procedure to get it on the air because the engineering firm had the contract for the tower transmission line transmitter. Basically went bankrupt, and it just was delay after delay after delay. But finally, after 10 years, it shows the kind of patient capital, it did happen.
After 10 years, it finally happened. You came along in 1979 as part of the family business. So you took over in 1979 as station manager?
Correct.
What was your first opportunity there? What did you find when you first walked in as station manager and also as the son of the founder?
Part of that was really easy because everyone knew what the mission was. From the front desk to the engineering staff, sales staff, was to be the best farm station in the nation. Again, the same formula: news, weather, markets, and sports, right up to your eyebrows. Now, I mean, it's very, very heavy information.
And it was appreciated because it was needed by the audience
Correct.
that you served. We see so much of format changes, call letter changes, ownership changes in media today. You've been rock solid, consistent in every one of those areas. Haven't changed a thing.
Well, the formats changed a little bit. The old days, we would have the homemaker show with kitchen clatter. My mother did part of that. She also had a 15-minute book program, sort of a book review. You had education aimed at school kids, at Little Red Schoolhouse, aimed at rural school kids, and some things like that. The block programming, we had some country music, and we had rock and roll music after school at 3:30, and I played rock and roll disc jockey in my junior and senior year of high school, and did the dances around the area. Had a classical music show, Masterworks of Music, for 2 hours every Sunday afternoon. I had the fun of doing that one too.
Well, you were quite the rock and roll personality in Lexington, huh?
Only one.
You moved into new facilities. You took over an existing building in Lexington and equipped it. Was that a pretty much of a financial gamble at that point, or were you pretty well settled by then?
We were pretty well settled by then. The Farm Credit people had built that building, very nice modern building, and to look like a bank. Then the farm crisis of the mid-'80s, they consolidated, so they had some extra buildings, so we negotiated a price. We had plans to build our own building north of Lexington, had the land, had architects start on the drawings. So this came along and said, well, let's stop the presses over here. Let's go over and see if we can pursue and make a deal with Farm Credit, which we eventually did. So then what I did is we had a basic schematic of, we'll call it a bank. So I gave everybody on the staff that outline. We said, you are the architect in charge. You designed the radio station. Then we had about 22 different versions. And when the sales staff left off the engineers left off this, and it was just a great deal of fun, but it made the point, we all can't have everything, so let's figure this out together. We got to maximize studio space, because we want like 3 studios, and we're going to have to grow, take care of the FM, so you got 4 studios, and it kind of went from there. Do we need this giant waiting area for 12 people? No. Let's make a perfect conference room, which is just on the outside of the outskirts of the building. So when you walk in, you got a place to hold a meeting.
Staff buy-in was a pretty good idea, wasn't it?
Works.
Everybody felt they had a
Works
role
time.
in making that happen. So you had a pretty big celebration there for the ribbon cutting, the grand opening of the new facility. You had some celebrities there.
It was a great deal of fun. We had KR, who was the governor then, and she came out, did a wonderful job. Had a very nice crowd. So then 4 days later, we had Congresswoman Virginia Smith come for the quote open house. We had to split the groups because you can't give a tour with that many people. So we had to split, make it a party 2 times rather than 1, which is fun to start with.
It's one way to do it. You added FM. How'd that come about, and why did you feel you needed an FM? It was relatively early in FM in western Nebraska.
We had a very good engineer, Bob Bittner, who looked down the road, saw the potential future of FM. At that point, there's even one experiment. There was going to be a 1,000,000-watt FM someplace in the country as a experiment. Well, that didn't ever happen. So we got into the FM game very, very early. So we had 50,000 watts on a 300-foot stick. We lost 4 towers over about 12 years. Ice storm, tornado, what have you. And we had to build a 600-foot stick. And we tried that again. Finally went back to a 300-foot stick for a little while. Then one of my projects was to build a 1,000-foot stick. And the board of directors said, why would you want to do that? We already lost 4 towers that were shorter. So let's try this one more time. We have a co-investor who's Bott Broadcasting based in Kansas City. So in the FM, as you know, the person on top has the biggest signal. So I said, Bott, you want to be in number 2 position or number 1? They said, number 1. I said, okay, you'll pay the premium, that's fine. We'll be number 2. Another religious group is number 3. They told the board, I've got God above us and God below us. It's all I know how to do. If this goes down, I'll just retire.
You pretty much hedged your bets, didn't you?
Still standing.
It's still there, still working. Talking about politics, as we mentioned earlier before we started recording, you've been a very important part of the political scene in western Nebraska, but you don't editorialize in such a way that you support or endorse candidates. But candidates have access to KRVN.
Definitely. It's been a policy for a long time to invite candidates. And we will also give them like a free half-hour interview show, which would be unheard of today. But that's what we did. And the news staff was instructed to do your research, ask good questions, but listen to the answers, then follow up on what they said, and then follow up again. And that way, we treat everyone nicely because one of them is going to win. So we get good reception there, which pays off in later years. I work with Nebraska Broadcasters Association and made trips back to Washington. You always got the appointment because you had a good reputation going in of being fair with these people.
You didn't do ambush interviews or anything like that.
This wasn't 60 Minutes.
Right. But you did have access to all the significant decision makers of the day. Who would you say was the most important person in that arena, or maybe your favorite person in that arena?
You know, several people. Virginia Smith, coming from a rural background in Chapel, she was just an icon in the 3rd District. That was fun. Tom Osler would come by, and the congressman, and his first stop would be not in the newsroom, but Dave Threll, a longtime DJ of ours, and that would be Osborne's supply of clean jokes. And then we'd get to do the interview. That was fun. Chuck Hagel was close. He spoke at some comments, audio tribute they had to my father after his passing in 2005. And I was in Nebraska Broadcasters Hall of Fame. He did a wonderful job on a roast, and I had fun just taking me apart, and it was hilarious. And no one knew he could be hilarious, but he can.
And went on to be hilarious as Secretary of Defense.
Yes.
You have expanded the original KRVN through acquisitions.
Correct. Scottsbluff in 1984, they're looking to supplement that far western Nebraska coverage, and because the signal wasn't quite what we hoped it would be with 880. You got very poor soil, sandy soil conditions, that's part of it for the ground transmission. But Scottsbluff popped up for sale, so negotiated with the Seaton family, Gladys Seaton. So we made a contract with 84 to purchase KNEB AM and FM. That had a good reputation to start with, so that was a nice transition. Then in 97 we went east to West Point, to KTIC AM and FM. It added that eastern corner, which helped the early morning coverage, like the 6 a.m. news or farm news for people, because of the way the signals work.
And then recently you've added Cozad, York, other areas?
Cozad and York were the 2 primary ones. It has some affiliation agreements with other stations. It was done after I retired in 2012, and Craig Larson, the current manager, did a wonderful job of doing that. So my hat's off to Craig.
You look at the roster of people that you have at Nebraska Rural Radio Network, so many of them have seen outstanding success at other broadcast operations around the state, but they seem to be attracted to Nebraska Rural Radio. You treat your people exceptionally well, and you attract the best broadcasters.
You have to work hard to recruit. in a town of then 4,000 people, now 10,000 people in the middle of Nebraska. So we take care of people in terms of the salaries, the fringe benefits, including a defined benefit plan, which is a tremendous thing. If you're 25 years old, you don't care about that because you can't even spell the word retirement. But if you're 45 and you're moving along, saying, this makes sense. Be with a good operation, clean signal, well respected, and it's a very nice hook.
It's security that you offer that doesn't seem to be particularly relatable in other areas in terms of broadcasting. Broadcasting is not thought of as one of the most secure industries in which to build a career, but you folks have kind of transcended that.
Oh, it's been most enjoyable because when I came there were a couple of people on the staff, and it started back in 1975. One announcer and then the executive assistant to the manager. And Dave Threll just recently retired, like 2016. So 75 to 2016 is a pretty good run. And he was a personality that people identified with, and he made even a weather forecast, something interesting and fun to listen to.
You covered such a wide area. You had people everywhere. I remember when, excuse me, I remember when I was in North Platte, the KRVN sales people would constantly be around, always around in town. And they weren't just sales people the way we think of that. They were more community service oriented type of folks where, yeah, they were selling commercials, but they were also relating to the business people in the community and brought news and information back to Lexington from their sales trips.
Exactly. The other way we got news and information back was each of the 4 farm groups, Farm Bureau, Co-op Council, the Grange, and Farmers Union, would come to the KRVN board meetings as ex officio members. So you had those 4 groups, all their members bringing information back to the board meetings. So that keeps things pretty well wired.
You usually find out things before anybody else that way.
Often, not always. But
Often, yes. The technology is changing, obviously. You're changing with it. You're meeting some of the new needs in terms of different platforms, different ways of getting information to your consumers.
Well, when AM was going to be killed by FM, which didn't happen, after AM was supposed to be killed by television, which didn't happen, the next platform was the internet. And we got very early in that. In 1995, we had Randy Bretz from NETV come out and talk about the internet to the board. And we moved very aggressively that way. We became the internet provider for Lexington and McCook and Broken Bow.
You actually brought the internet to the community
Yes.
before it was there.
A partnership with Lincoln Telephone rather. But that was fun because the staff was saying, why are we doing this? We get our core AM and FM. FM is more music oriented. AM is hardcore information, news, weather, market, and sports. There's one more platform that's accessible, 24/7. And went to some seminars and got a pretty good head start on things and started selling not only subscription service for the service, but also some spots for advertisers. So you'd buy a KRVN auction time spot for your sale barn. Well, let's do a little internet add-on package. Okay, I'll try it.
Another thing you did was you got into FM translators to overcome some of the limitations of your AM signals.
The FM translators in Kearney was very valuable. That helped quite a bit. And we have one in West Point and Scottsbluff. But when the FCC finally does make a decision, you've got to change to get with that quickly before the opportunity is lost, the door is closed.
Mm-hmm. Explain to me, because I know a lot of people have the impression that Nebraska Rural Radio is a nonprofit corporation. I brought that up to you tonight, and you said, well, that's not exactly how we operate. Can you kind of explain how that works?
It's more like a hybrid. Bob Crosby was an attorney in North Platte, went on to become Governor Crosby later on. He did the articles and bylaws, which has not changed but a few words since the beginning. You had to be a farmer or a rancher or spouse to be a member, or you could be a minister in a small town, and we kick the ministers out. But otherwise, they're the same. So we pay the same taxes, state, local, federal, as any other radio station or TV station. We're big on donations of time, and when we have the money to higher education. The profits are reinvested as opposed to going to dividends. We have 4,000 members. They don't get a dividend every year. They and everybody else gets a dividend when they turn their radio on. So we're not sending 30% to corporate in New York. It's designed so corporate in New York can never figure out a way to get enough members together to vote on anything. So it's designed that way on purpose, to be owned by the farmers and ranchers, the producers that we serve.
Over the years, I'm sure people have come to you with offers wanting to buy KRVN. I'm sure it's an extraordinarily valuable property. Have there been offers?
There have been some offers. There have been sort of casual acquaintances like, if you ever think about selling, let me know, and by the way, what would you want? And my standard answer, which is $1 more than KFAB, AM, and FM. And they don't come back, so.
Good standard answer. Your dad, Max Brown, member of the Nebraska Broadcasters Association Hall of Fame, had some interesting years as well after your mom passed, and he became famous as being someone who knew someone very influential.
Well, eventually, my mother passed away, and a long time later, Max remarried after Muriel Buck Humphrey, Senator and Vice President Hubert Humphrey's wife. Hubert passed away. So they eventually had some correspondence back and forth and some phone calls, and got together and got married up in Tonka Bay, Minnesota. And they had 12 wonderful years together, a great deal of fun. When Max was at the Broadcasters Hall of Fame banquet in '82, I had Muriel with him, and she was for the buzz of the banquet that evening. And my father, who was not a great speaker, he really had to work at it, stood up and did a really good job. And Charlie Thone was the governor, who was a friend of Max's. He said, "Charlie, I've never ever asked you for something personally, but I got a little trouble at home and I need some help." Muriel came to Nebraska from the Twin Cities, saw Republican River, Republican City, Republican this, Republican that. There's nothing named for the Democrats, so please find a brook or a stream or a creek to name for the Democrats.
Muriel was quite a personality. You got to know her very well, and so she was a regular, South Dakotan?
Yes, here in South Dakota, and just a grassroots, good values, no egotistical bone in her body, soft-spoken, did excellent needlepoint, which we still have examples in our home, but just very gracious and kind. Politics was fine except for the campaigning, because that took a long time then as it does now. But she liked public service, and she and Max are opposite parties, but it's like a sort of ping pong match at dinner once in a while, or a tennis match going back and forth, in a very friendly, gentle way. Sure. And a very, very gracious lady. We had a great deal of fun with her, many good conversations.
Eric, you've been very active in the Nebraska Broadcasters Association over the years, and also active legislatively in visiting with representatives in Washington, getting things done, getting things accomplished. What would you say is maybe the most important aspect of that part of your career?
I think it's important to stay in constant communications with the senators and representatives because things change. The laws change, the FCC changes personnel, therefore they might twist something else differently. You've got to have them think of all of Nebraska and the agricultural base in Nebraska, which is the backbone of our economy, #1 industry, and just have to give them a chance to do a good job. But you got to give them feedback from the home folks.
And you've been able to get access to them over the years. I know you were very close to Bob Kerrey when he was in Washington.
He was a great deal of fun. As you know, he's one of a kind, and he defeated Charlie Thone, and Thone ran for a second term. Thone later said, and was brought up at his funeral recently, probably the best thing that ever happened to him. Because Charlie Thone had more fun after that in private life. But Bob Carey was a very vigorous person. We took a tour on the Saturday of the governor's mansion, and I had twin daughters and a son, so 7, 4, and 4. And he was eating some breakfast. We saw him through a door, and he came out, and so he kind of gave us a tour and shook my daughter's hand. They didn't wash their hands for about 2 weeks, but anyway, he's an interesting guy.
Looking back at where you've been, what you've seen, what you've done, what is your assessment going forward? What do you think the industry looks like down the road? Have you got positive hopes for radio and television broadcasting and how it will evolve into other platforms, other social media? What do you think?
We got positive hopes. The whole direction of social media is going to be for the psychologists and sociologists to figure out sometime. But I do like the internet platform to go in with an AM and an FM. A great deal of consolidation, as you know, in the radio business, and that's got some good points and some bad points because you lose the local flavor often. If corporate decides whether or not you have a network program and it's 6 o'clock in Omaha, Nebraska, or whether you're doing your drive time at 6, or you've got some national show on. So.
Even though you do have a network of stations across the state, Scottsbluff, Lexington, particularly West Point, and York now, you do leave local programming in the hands of a local manager who does take programming from Nebraska Rural Radio Network, but still has the opportunity to program his stations locally to respond to the needs of the local communities.
Absolutely. There's some economies of scale. The 7:15 Farm News at KRVN is the 6:15 Farm News in Scottsbluff because of the time change, and West Point runs that Farm News too. So you can have more bang for the buck that way. They each have a news director at each station, so it's not, they emphasize local news. And to be relevant today, I think in radio, it's local, local, and local. You've got to take care of things that way.
You've got to respond to the communities you're licensed to serve.
And be proud of it, and be part of it, and be involved in it. And dig in and be on the JCs and the Chamber and the Kiwanis and the Rotary and the on and on and on.
Cover school board and county board and city council meetings. A lot of stations have gotten away from that, especially in the bigger metropolitan areas. You have left Nebraska Rural Radio in pretty good hands. You've got pretty effective managers and crew at each of your radio stations. That's a testimony to the people you've recruited and put in place. It looks like you're pretty well set for the future.
I think they're doing a wonderful job. Craig Larson is the overall manager now, and he's been in Lexington and Scottsbluff and West Point, so he knows the territory very well. Dwight Lane in West Point and Tim Marshall in Lexington, veteran broadcasters, but you know both of them. And they serve their community and have some fun in the process.
And they're successful broadcasters.
Yes.
Our subject today has been Eric Brown, the 50,000 watt legacy heritage radio station KRVN, and Nebraska Rural Radio, also covering the state of Nebraska, a truly legendary part of Nebraska broadcast history. This has been a production of UNO Television for the Nebraska Broadcasters Association History Project.